First Kisses, a Seasons of Sugar Creek prequel novella by Amey Zeigler. Audiobook produced by Lazy Glaze Communications. Autumn of 1971. Sugar Creek, Vermont.
Early Saturday morning, Deb Poverly curled in bed, listening to the sounds of her parents finishing their before-work fight in the bathroom down the hall. The faucet turned on and off in their 1950s porcelain pedestal sink. Dad must be brushing his teeth because Deb no longer heard his low baritone. Mom squawked in her low alto. Deb couldn't make out the words, but she knew what they were discussing. Finances. They never came out and told the family directly they were poor. But Deb knew it. From the pot of unsweetened oatmeal on the stove in the morning to the thin, threadbare shirts her dad wore to his job at the Sweet Milk Dairy. Even her mother's dresses were a decade or two out of date. Times were tough. If only they'd let her get a job. Most of the young men had gone off to Vietnam, and Sugar Creek needed people to work menial jobs around town. But her father forbade it, which was why she waited for them to go to work, her mom to her family's bakery, and her dad to his work as a dairyman. She aimed to get a job today. After the front door closed, she waited a few breaths, imagining her parents carpooling to work in their hatchback. Dad dropped Mom off in town before heading south out of Sugar Creek to the dairy. When the house was quiet for a full 20 minutes, Deb lifted her head off her pillow and listened again, just to make sure they didn't come back for a forgotten lunch. Nothing. She pulled the warm covers off her and stepped to the icy wood floors. October was still warm during the day, but the mornings held their chill. Tiptoeing across the wood floors, she found her clothes and put them on. First, a long pair of wide-legged pants, then her blouse and coat. Picking up a box she kept hidden under her bed, she opened her window, stuck her feet out, and jumped. Out where she lived, the roads were pretty empty. The only place in town any traffic was on Main, and she had it away from there to the drive-in eatery. She walked along Church Street to the main street, and from there hung a left. Cars were parked under glorious neon lights, still lighting up the dawn, all around the title Fergie's. Walking through a crowd of kids who were a little older than her, she gripped her box. She couldn't be intimidated by the cool crowd. They wore their hair a little longer and talked about free living. There was nothing free about her life. She was about to get a job. Just as she opened the wooden screen door to walk inside, a boy, sitting on the table, caught her eye. His sideburns were a little too long, his chin at a cocky height, his eyes were the worst of all. They danced with delight when he looked at her. Who was this guy? He looked too old to be in high school, and yet he wasn't serving his country. And why did his glance give her butterflies in her stomach? Still staring at this hunk of a specimen, she opened the door, but the door knocked into her box, spilling it onto the floor. The boy jumped from where he sat and bent to help her. Her face flamed as she reached for her beat-up pair of roller skates. They probably smelled like feet. He put them back into the box. Roller skates, huh? Would he think she was a baby? She'd gotten them for Christmas after begging and begging her parents for them. But that was a few years ago, and they had plenty of scuffs in use since then. She stood straight, avoiding his gaze. Thank you. Roller skates are cool. She glanced up. Was he mocking her? His expression looked sincere. I was hoping to get a job as a car hop. That would be fun. I hope you get it. The well wishes sent a rush of warmth through her. He held the door open for her, and she stepped inside to the warmth and smell of a busy kitchen. She stepped up to the small window where she rang the small silver bell. A manager stepped into her view. I'm here for an interview. Great. Can you use those things? The man with a mustache pointed to her box where the lid was still open. Yes. She'd become quite proficient. Great, you're hired. We need more help around here. Can you work? Right now, she gulped. She hadn't set up her bed in a fake body position in case her parents discovered her absence. But the allure of 45 cents an hour tugged at her. Would her parents even notice? Her father was always so dead tired he fell asleep in front of the TV set at 7 p.m. Sure. Setting the box on a ledge, she strapped on her skates. Here. The manager handed her a tray filled with hamburgers and fries, smelling of grease and protein. Take these to the hungry boys out there. He nodded toward the front door. Next week, we'll have a uniform for you. Swell. Gulping, she tied the apron around her waist, patting the napkins and straws. She grabbed the tray, a little unsteady on her feet. As much as she had practiced, she'd never tried carrying a loaded tray while skating. She opened the screen door, feeling the heat rise from the freshly cooked fries, and took a step out into the cool evening. Who ordered food? The boys moved en masse to where she set down the tray of hamburgers, edging her out of the way. Only one guy waited, the same one who smiled at her on the way in. "Aren't you hungry?" she said to him. "Not particularly." It was the first time she noticed he had an accent. "Where are you from? Here? From Sugar Creek?" She thought she knew every good-looking guy from here to Burlington. He cracked a smile. "I was sick with the mumps for 2 years and had to be tutored. I begged my father to let me return to public school." Her jaw dropped. "You're Roland Laurent, aren't you?" She'd heard about him. The whole school knew about him. He was the town's golden boy, the most eligible bachelor. He should have been off to war, as he was 20, but she'd heard he'd gotten sick and was held back from school a few years. Did his family do that on purpose to keep him from the draft? He'd certainly changed in the last 2 years since she'd risked a peek at him when his parents drove by in their fancy car. Instead of being a lanky basketball player, which was when she last saw him, he was a senior, taller, broader, and nearly 20. His hair had grown out, and he'd grown a nice mustache over his lip. Sugar Creek was a small town, and she was forbidden to have any association with their family. The Poverlys and Laurents did not mix. "Why haven't I seen you in school?" He grinned. A hint of a dimple near his eye appeared. Her knees went weak, which was dangerous considering she was on skates. "I skipped my sophomore year and plan on graduating early this year." She wanted to get done with high school and get a job. She hated being poor. Traveling the world and seeing life outside of Sugar Creek was what she was meant for. "Oh, so you're really smart." He grinned again, leaning his arm against the table. She ducked her head and blushed. "I don't know if that's true. I bet it is. What's your name?" Her heart lunged. There was no way she could tell him who she was. He'd drop his interest faster than a burning hot fry. "Hey, new girl," her manager called from the wooden screen door. "I have another customer waiting for his food." She nodded, then turned to Roland. "I'd better go. Enjoy your meal." He raised his eyebrows. "Oh, I've already got my money's worth." One of the jocks came up to him, a hamburger in hand. "Thanks for paying for us, Roland." She spun and faced the guy with rugged sideburns and the largest bell-bottoms. "Wait, you paid for everyone to eat?" He shrugged, keeping his face neutral. "New girl." The manager called her away. Deb wanted to say something nice to show that she thought he was pretty swell for being so generous, but instead she nodded a goodbye and skated to the door. She opened the screen and glanced behind her. Roland Laurent was still smiling at her, but that would only last until he found out her name.
The pretty brunette with the nice legs made Roland smile. Roller skates at the drive-thru. Roland watched her. 15 minutes after she left, he ordered something else. Mozzarella cheese sticks? She raised an eyebrow and settled the paper container in front of him. Can't get enough of them. He kept his smile trained on her. "What's your name?" She skated off. He passed the cheese sticks off to one of his friends. 15 minutes later, he ordered a shake. "Strawberry malt?" She settled it in front of him. "My favorite." He winked and then passed it off to Olson, who was basically a human garbage can. The man was 6'2" and could eat anything and everything. On the off weekends, he worked at the Sweet Milk Dairy and was all forearms and muscle. Name? Was she catching on? He'd keep going all day if he had to. She just smiled and skated off. What an infuriating woman. He liked it. 15 minutes later, he ordered a fountain drink. 1 lemon-lime soda. She settled it in front of him. "Anything else you want to order before I go back inside?" "Just your name." "Nope." And off she went, tossing her head in such a flirtatious manner that it drove Roland crazy. He had to know who she was. 15 minutes later, he walked up to the window. "I'd like a corn dog." The manager shook his head. A few minutes later, the girl came out with the paper envelope with the steaming corn dog. "I'm going to sit here all day, buying food unless you tell me your name." "You want to know that badly?" She bit her lip and glanced over her shoulder toward the kitchen. Wait for me until after closing. I'll be here. He set his jaw. Most of his friends left and went home. He stopped ordering food, which was good because he wasn't really all that hungry. At last, the lights went out and the girl came out in her brown leather buckle shoes. Not skating home? No, haha! Far too dark for me to see all the bumps in the sidewalks. Here, I'll drive you home. I prefer to walk. Then we'll walk. He stuffed his hands in his leather jacket. The girl intrigued him. Smart, pretty, funny. Who was she, and why didn't he know her already? So you want to know who I am? More than anything. She stopped in front of a white church that had been there for ages. Once you find out, you'll be sad. Why would I be sad? Because I'm Deborah Poverly. The words lanced him like a hot poker. You're a Poverly? Why did he have an image in his mind that all the Poverlys were saw-toothed, bow-legged roughnecks? Maybe that's how his father always talked about them. He wasn't allowed to hang out with any of them. Perhaps that was the real reason his father held him back in school, to keep him from consorting with them. She swung her hands behind her hips. So now you know, and now you know we can't be friends or anything because our parents would kill us. He lifted his chin, mockingly accusing her. My parents blame yours for higher milk prices, and mine blame yours for higher gas prices, she retorted. They both broke into grins. He edged closer to her, basking in her smiles. It seems like we have a lot in common. She nodded. Yes, ridiculous parents. She turned down a residential street. Why did the feud start anyway? He kicked rocks on the sidewalk and ducked under a tree. Oh, someone disagreed about something back there. You know how it goes in a small town. Rumors fly like wildfire, and soon the rest of the town fans the flames. People pick sides, build up fortresses, and dig in their heels. I suppose, but that doesn't mean it can't change, does it? Haha, imagine what our parents would say if they saw us together. She stopped in front of a clapboard home. This is my house. The darkened house was smaller than his front living salon. I know what my parents would say. I have a pretty good notion, too. She placed a hand on the mailbox. I'm forbidden from even speaking to you, so that's why we can't really be seen together or even be hanging out together. She glanced over her shoulder, then passed by him on the front walk, heading toward the front door. See, that's where you're wrong. He hopped in front of her, walking backwards. We can break the years of hate. We can be the ones to set things straight. The cooler night air blew her hair around her face. She reached up and brushed it back. I don't know about that. My parents are adamant not to do anything around your house. I can't even drink sweet milk dairy because their property abuts yours. He shook his head. What kind of logic was that? That's just silly. She stopped. Oh, my dad can work there, but I can't drink the milk, eat the cheese, or anything else. I'll have a little talk with your dad. He flipped around and walked next to her with determination. She grabbed his arm. Oh no, don't. You'll only make things worse. She laughed. He liked the feel of her next to him. Worse? How can it be worse? You're forbidden to speak to me or anyone in my family. How can that be right? All because of something that happened 100 years ago or so. He faced forward. Let me talk to your dad. I'll get him to change his mind. She shook her head. You don't know how stubborn he is. You take after him, I see. He slid his gaze to hers with a teasing grin. Ha! She swatted him on the shoulder. Look how long it took for you to divulge your name. My last name is my identity. I was afraid you'd not be happy with who I am. Ah, it's just a family name. What does it really matter? He stopped and faced her, taking her hand. Look, Poverlys and Laurents have been fighting for too long, and over what, nobody can remember. It's time we laid that feud to rest. How do you suggest we do that? By facing the problem head on. He stepped up to the front porch and rang the bell. What, are you crazy? She checked her wristwatch. 7 p.m. My parents are in bed, and they don't know that I'm out of the house. Both her parents worked early morning jobs. What was he thinking? If he was hoping to make a good impression on her parents, he probably just blew it.
Run! Deb grabbed Roland's arms and headed for the tall shrubbery around the house. Although the horror of her parents discovering her made her heart beat like a bass drum, she couldn't help but giggle with the nervous energy. With haste, Roland followed behind her. Are you laughing or crying? She hid behind a giant rhododendron bush and held her breath, watching the windows from the shadows. Both, I think. The lights went on. A shot of adrenaline went through her. Get back, she whispered. Tucking him behind her, she scooted back more out of sight. The front door opened, then the storm door. Her father, in a white t-shirt, stepped out onto the front porch and squinted into the night. Who rang my doorbell? His dairyman's forearms shone in the pale moonlight. He held a hammer. The toolbox was closer than the gun safe. Holding her breath, Deb froze. Her father had quite a temper, and if she was discovered out of her room at night, it would be painful for her backside. Even though she was nearly 18, her father had no problems using the old paddle. At last, her father turned and opened the door and went inside. Deb exhaled, turning toward Roland. Once she was sure the threat was gone, she burst out laughing, smothering the sounds with her mouth. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Roland glanced behind her to the front porch. I was afraid he was going to bash my brains out with that hammer. Letting all the nervous energy out felt so good. He probably would have, she said between fits of giggles. I can't believe you rang the doorbell. I'm tired of all the fighting. Me too. Let's be the ones to stop the cycle. He stepped closer to her. She glanced up at him in the darkness. His large, slim frame filled her vision. His warmth radiated from him, not a hand's breadth away. He was everything she remembered him from grade school, brash, fun, and a bit cocky. Only now she added tall, dashingly handsome, and athletic, and his eyes seemed to smile only at her. If only he'd lean over and kiss her. His eyes held her in their trance. The whole world faded into the sounds of crickets and moonlight. I hope you don't think me too bold, but can I call you sometime? His question broke the spell. Oh no, if my parents picked up the phone, they would be horrified. I'd be grounded until I graduated. She backed away, pushing out her hand. He touched the tips of her fingers. Then when can I see you again? Talk to you again? At his touch, she melted. At school. It's the only safe place. You must never come by here. Ever. He brought her fingertips to his lips. Deb held her breath. He brushed his lips over them. Until school starts. He placed his lips briefly on the most sensitive part of her fingers, keeping his gaze on her. Lightning shot through her, straight to the heart. The tremors from her father were replaced by the warmth of Roland's touch. Excitement, for a new reason, spread through her. Grasping the old handrail, she floated up the stairs, then looked at her hands. Oh no, I forgot my skates at work. Do you need them? I was supposed to take my baby sister skating early tomorrow. She bit her lip. How could she be so forgetful? I'll get them for you. But it's likely closed, he winked. I have ways, don't worry. His accent sounded so cozy and soothing. They'll be on the doorstep by 8 a.m., I promise. She relaxed. He said it in a way that made her trust his word. Thank you. I can sleep soundly tonight. She blew him a kiss from her palm, from the very hand he kissed earlier. Of course, she did not, in fact, sleep soundly. All night, she tossed and turned, but not out of worry for her skates, but in the pleasant dreams of memory. Each time she closed her eyes, Roland was there, staring at her, kissing her fingers, making her blush. She sighed. Her heart rate increased. She flipped to her side. His voice sounded melodious with his French-Canadian accent. Why was he interested in her? Roland owned a car. His family lived in the mansion clear out of town and has for generations. He was the oldest son of the wealthiest family in town, and the biggest question on her mind, would he be able to deliver the skates by morning?
Roland raced back to the diner. The lights were all out. Turning the doorknob, his fists ached. He hit the wooden screen door. Locked. Now what? He promised Deborah, and he never retreated from a promise. He knew the owner, Jack Fiddleworth, and he knew where he lived. Probably he was still up. Roland jumped in the car, started it, and put it into gear. If Jack Fiddleworth had just finished closing up, he likely wouldn't be in bed just yet. At the corner, Roland turned left, then right. Luckily, at nearly 1, not a car was on the road. He blew through small, hilly, and unlit roads, until he found Jack's place, Mrenny. It was a little on the outskirts, near a pond. The lights were still on, but he better tread carefully. He was lucky Deborah's dad didn't come out with his hunting rifle. With the wildlife, having something to protect yourself was a way of life, self-preservation. Roland creaked up the wooden stairs and knocked on the door. The porch light came on. Jack opened the door a crack. Yeah? Sorry to disturb you, but your newest employee left her skates at the diner, and she needs them in the morning. I'm not heading back. She can get them at 11 when we open for lunch. He started to close the door. But you see, she needs them tomorrow morning. 11 isn't going to work. Jack huffed. I'll tell you what. I'll pay you. Roland dug in his wallet and found a $50 bill. 50, if you lend me the keys. I'll slip in, grab the skates, and return them here in less than 40 minutes. A 50, eh? Jack eyed the bill. Roland gave a quick nod. I'll get the keys. He left the door. When he came back, he opened it wider and snatched the bill and dropped the keys into his hands. No hanky-panky there. If I come in and find something amiss, I know your pop and I'll send him the bill. No hanky-panky, I promise. Just retrieving those skates for a friend. Jack grunted again. With the keys in hand, Roland jumped from the top stair, landing in the dirt and gravel of the driveway. I'll be back in a jiffy. Once in his car, he turned on his lights and sped around the small country roads. At the diner, he unlocked the front door, pocketed the keys, and searched for her skates. There, on a shelf, was a box of skates. He opened them. They were the saddest-looking skates he'd ever seen, taped in the middle, seams coming apart. The leather was worn and smeared with marks. The stopper at the front was nearly worn down. He had an idea. After turning off the light and closing the door, he made sure to lock it securely before jumping in his car. He returned the keys to Jack's and then sat in the car, with his hands on the wheel. He could easily slip these over to Deb's house and go home. Or he turned the key in the ignition and drove out to his house. His sister was the same size as Deborah. She never wore her skates anyway. He sneaked back into his house, crept up the stairs, careful to remove his shoes before stepping on the shag carpet. At his sister's door, he knocked. She was probably asleep. Should he ask her? Chances are she wouldn't care about the skates, but still it would be good to ask before taking them. He opened the door and crept in the room. He knelt by her bed. Nicole, he whispered. She moved. Nicole, he said again. She blinked open her eyes. What do you want? I need your skates. What? She rubbed her eyes. I need your skates. I'll buy you a new pair. Why do you want my skates? She propped herself up on her elbow, more awake. Long story, I'll explain in the morning. She looked at her clock. What do you need skates for at this time of night? A girl. He warmed when he thought of Deborah. Oh, in that case, sure. Just make sure you buy me another pair. Thank you. Where are they? You're not going to turn on my light, are you? No, I'll find them in the dark. They're in my closet. She rolled over. The closet? Roland opened the closet, and there were scores of shoes in boxes in there. How would he ever find the right one with the skates? He turned toward Nicole, but she'd probably already gone back to sleep. He knelt on the ground, wishing for a flashlight. He lifted the lids on a dozen boxes. She didn't use them often. Maybe they were in the back. He lifted the lids on a few in the very back, darkest corner. At last, he flipped up a lid, and the metal wheels shone in the dim light. Bingo! He tucked them under his arm and tiptoed out of the room. Thank you, he whispered, although he doubted she heard. He couldn't wait to surprise Deborah with the new skates.
Deb must have slept some amount of time, for her eyes blinked open to the light. Her younger sister, Sue, had flipped on the light. We're still going skating, right? For sure. She sat up. It was 8 o'clock. Had Roland gotten her skates? The diner didn't open until 11. She trusted him, and she hoped her trust wasn't in vain. In her nightdress, she slipped from the warmth of her bed. Her sister followed her into the front room. Where are you going? I'm just checking on something. She opened the door. There on the front porch wasn't her box of skates, but there was a box, a newer box. What is this? She murmured. He hadn't picked up the wrong box, had he? That would be so sad. She opened the lid. There inside was a new pair of skates, just her size. How? Was the man magic, or was this all a mistake? A piece of paper fluttered in the cool morning breeze. She picked it up and read it. Deborah, I hope you don't mind if I found a pair of skates more fitting than those old ones. You have a great time this morning. Roland Deb nearly fell over. They were for her. How did he get a new pair of skates? Overnight? Warmth filled her chest, and she squeezed the box to her. Grab your skates, Sue. We're going skating. She brought the box into her house. When Sue saw the box, she widened her eyes. Where did those come from? Those are super nice. Aren't they wonderful? Santa came early. Something like that. Then she stopped. Please don't tell Mom or Dad. They wouldn't understand the gift. Sue shrugged. Whoever it was, they must love you. Do you think so? She mused. She must find something for Roland, something that would show her appreciation. Skating took most of the morning. Each revolution around the rink, she tried to think of something that would be good enough for Roland. What do you get a boy who has everything? Even her meager paycheck wouldn't go far in buying him a gift. And besides, she worked to give money to her parents to help them afford Sue's braces. Maybe she could do something for him. But what? Monday morning came, and with it brought the news of homecoming week celebration. Amy Grady was in the Sugar Creek High Halls passing out flyers. Vote for the homecoming court all week. Deb passed by and took a flyer. Amy Grady's name was written in huge letters at the top of the paper. Amy Grady was a cheerleader and always on. Last year, she wore her hair in a beehive, with her peroxide hair smoothing over her shoulders. Now she shifted her style, and her hair hung on either sides with muted lipstick. Deb wouldn't ever vote for Amy Grady. She dated everyone on the football team. Deb crumpled up the flyer and threw it in the trash. So many events to disrupt education. Marcy, her friend since first grade, met up with her. She had a headband in her hair and had straightened her curls, which Deb thought was such a shame. She had the nicest curls. I'm looking forward to some of the events. Yes, well, today is an assembly, and you'll never guess what they're doing. What? They're auctioning off the football players. The football players? Deb stopped by her classroom door. Yes, you have to bid on them. Marcy sneered. How primitive, as if we'd want to date the meatheads on the football team. Deb nodded her head. No one could tempt me on the football team. A huge pep assembly gathered after sixth period in the gym. Deb wished she'd brought earplugs. The band and the cheerleaders whipped the students into a frenzy. Marcy placed her hands over her ears. We're all going to be deaf in our older years. What? Deb asked, just as she realized what Marcy had said. Never mind, don't yell. The student body president grabbed a corded microphone and shouted at the crowd. Today we have a special treat. We're going to auction the football players. Bid on one, and they will do your bidding. The crowd crowed. Yes, they will carry your books for you, shine your shoes, you name it. He glanced over at the doorway. Within reason, of course. Marcy leaned closer to Deb and yelled over the band. Wanna leave? Then the football players ran into the gym with their letterman's jackets. Deb dropped her jaw. There was Roland in the middle of all the guys. He was a football player. All of a sudden, she very much didn't want to leave. Her eyes were riveted on Roland, joking with the other guys. He glanced up into the stands and made eye contact with her. He smiled. A nervous energy coursed through Deb. She smiled back. The crowd went wild. Okay, settle down now. The student body president hushed the band and the students. We're going to bid on these stellar young men. They will be yours for the day. Remember, all the proceeds will help the team buy uniforms for next year. The captain of the team stepped forward. Starting with Stuart, who will bid 10 cents? A girl to the far right raised her hand. 10 cents. From there, the bidding went nuts. They got to a whole $7. Deb started getting nervous. She had some cash saved, but could she sacrifice it to bid on Roland for a day? A few other football players came up, Rod, Henry, Bob Fiskar, and Jules. Then Roland stood close to the student body president. Deb's whole being shook. Should she do it? Let's start the bidding with $1. Don't you think he's worth it? Amy Grady, standing behind them, lifted her pom-pom into the air. $1. The student body president glanced behind him. The crowd went wild. Well, that didn't take long. Do I hear $2? Before Deb knew it, she was on her feet. $2, she hollered over the crowd that grew more raucous by the minute. Her whole being trembled. Her heat felt like she was racing instead of just standing there. Roland looked up into her eyes and flashed his 1,000-watt grin. Deb couldn't hear anything for a few seconds. The crowd melted away, the noise faded. Roland's smile filled her. Do I hear $3? Roland is just back in school after a break. He's ready to tackle this homecoming game. 3. Shaken from her trance by Amy Grady's voice competing with her, Deb didn't wait for the student body president. $5. The students shouted again and stomped their feet on the wood bleachers. Come on, girls. He's worth a lot more than that. Just look at those biceps. Roland took off his jacket and flexed. $10. Amy Grady shouted with her megaphone. The cheerleaders gathered around her, shaking their pom-poms. $10? The cheering nearly downed the student body president. So far, Roland beat the highest bid. A huge grin spread across his face. The other footballers slapped him on the back, congratulating him. His ego would be insufferable. Deb bit her lip. 15. She said it before she even realized what came out of her mouth. 15 was a lot of money. That was all she had saved by months of working. Marcy tugged on her sleeve to sit down, but Deb couldn't. Her energy flowed through her. All she knew is that she had to beat Amy Grady. Amy Grady stared at her with squinted eyes and consulted with the cheerleaders. Was she checking to see how much money they had? Were they pooling their resources? Marcy? Deb bent down, keeping her eyes on the competition. How much money do you have? Marcy's grandma gave her birthday money every year. Total? In the bank? $5. I'll pay you back. I didn't say you could borrow it. $17.50. Amy Grady jumped up and down. $20. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at Deb. Had she really said it? I didn't say you could borrow it, Marcy hissed. I'll pay you back. $20. The student body president finally recovered and roared into the microphone. Wowee, did you hear that, Roland? We'd better let you go for 20. Bidding closed. Sold to Deborah Poverly for $20. Amy Grady went up to the student body president and tugged on his shoulder. He covered the microphone with his hand to keep their conversation from being blasted all over the gymnasium. Amy hurriedly talked to him, pointing to the other cheerleaders. He shook his head. Amy Grady looked with pleading eyes, lowered her chin, and pouted. The student body president shook his head. She stamped her foot. Bits of the yelling could be heard in the bleachers. The football players looked away from Amy Grady making a scene with her tantrum. The student body president pointed back to the cheerleaders, shook his head, and recovered. Her shoulder slumped, and finally she backed down. Her defeat was all over her face. Glancing up to the bleachers, she caught Deb's eyes. The scowl burned Deb to the core. Deb risked a glance at Roland. He glowed like never before. The crowd cheered. The football team slapped him on his back. Roland kept his gaze on hers, fixed with a smile. Payment must be remitted by the beginning of the school day, on Friday morning, to get your footballer to do your bidding. The student body president went on with the next show. Sit down. Marcy tugged on her sleeve. You're going to have to come up with that other $5. I didn't say you could have it. My parents would kill me for spending it on something so frivolous. Deb barely registered Marcy's words. She would have to find a way to make $5 by the end of the week.
Throwing his letterman's jacket over his shoulders, Roland searched for Deborah through the tide of student body, coming off the bleachers. He couldn't believe she sacrificed so much for him. She worked so hard for her money. He couldn't let her pay all her savings just so he could do her bidding for a day. A flood of students filled the gym floor from the stands as they dismissed the assembly. He had to admit having two girls fight over him fluffed his head a bit. He would have had to been blind to not notice Amy's obvious flirtations. She even put his name on her flyer for homecoming court, campaigning for both of them. It was just too cliché, a cheerleader and a football player. He liked Amy Grady. She was a nice girl, but she wasn't Deborah. Deborah worked hard and had a quirky sense of self that only came from living a hard life. She saw the world in a different light. As he drove home, he noticed a girl walking on the side of the road with long auburn hair pulled up in a simple ponytail. He could pick out the curve of her neck anywhere. Deborah. Grinning to himself, he pulled off to the side of the road where she walked, her ponytail swinging, and drove slowly beside her. Want a ride? She turned and blushed. Are you kidding? I can't be seen with you. Her reaction made him all the more desirous for her to get in. I have something to ask you. She stopped, holding her books across her chest. Okay, what? Hop in, and I'll ask you. Finally, to his relief, she opened the door. With renewed energy, he put the car in park, waiting for her to close the door. Are you going to homecoming? I'll probably have to work. Weekends are big nights for the diner. His heart thundered in his chest. He moved one trembling hand from the steering wheel and stuffed it behind him. I was hoping to take you if you'd like to go with me. He moved back into the street, going as slow as possible to keep conversation going with Deborah as long as he could. Her eyebrows raised. She pointed to her chest. Me? Why would you want to go with me? Because you're genuine, kind, courageous. Who else would I want to go with? He waited for a car to enter an intersection in front of him before continuing on, using any excuse to prolong this drive. She lowered her head. I saw your name on the ballot for Homecoming King. Are you sure you don't want to go with someone more popular? Amy Grady is on the ballot. He tossed her what he hoped was his million-dollar grin, stretching his hand across the seat until he reached her shoulder. I'll nominate you for Homecoming Queen. Shaking her head, she held up her hand, her eyebrows peaked. Oh, please don't. I won't win, and I'll look like a fool up there with all the cheerleaders and popular girls. He patted her shoulder, then retracted his hand as he watched cross traffic at a main road. Nonsense. I'll tell all my football buddies to vote for you. Her shoulder sagged. She sighed, staring at the leather seating. Just don't be disappointed if I don't win. Amy Grady has been campaigning for votes and has a good week's lead on me. She glanced up. Why do girls campaign so hard for something so silly? It's not like in 50 or even 20 years people will even care. Using both hands, he cranked his steering wheel to make a left. Because in America, we don't have royalty. It's fun to pretend for a day, you know? Having the tiara, people making a big deal. I once saw your mom, who was the sugar queen back, about 10 years ago. Remember? In the parade? She won such a beautiful tiara. Roland looked straight ahead, focusing on the road ahead of them. His mother passed away from the same illness he had just recovered from. He cleared emotion from his throat and looked away, hoping Deborah didn't see the tears rising in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I forgot your mom. She touched his arm. He shrugged off the grief. No, don't worry about it. She was a beautiful woman. She stared out the front window with a look of sheer delight across her features. Ever since I saw her, sitting so regal and majestic in the back of that '62 convertible, I've wanted to wear a tiara. Little did she know that his mom was a debutante in her days and wore real silver tiaras with cut diamonds, not the ones with paste gemstones they sold in stores. She came from old Montreal money. Then it's settled. I'll nominate you. Her mouth formed an O. Oh, you can't. I won't even have a dress to wear. I can't even afford the last $5 I pledged to bid on you. As soon as she said it, she blushed and looked toward the other side of the car. You bid money you don't have. She nodded, keeping her gaze on him. I just didn't want Amy Grady getting her meat hooks into you. Her admission made his chest swell. Deborah sacrificed too much. That's very nice of you. You need the $5. Where will you get it? I don't know, but if I don't have the money by Friday morning, I'll have to forfeit to her. Here. While stopped at a stop sign, he dug into his pants for his wallet, keeping one hand on the steering wheel. Take this $5. She pushed his hand away with the proffered bill. I can't take money from you to pay for you. That would be silly. Why? It just is. She crossed her hands over her chest. You sure are stubborn, Deborah Poverly. Instead of protesting, she pointed to the curb up ahead and to the left under a canopy of trees growing in the berm. Drop me off here. But your house is down there. Was she offended by his comment? I know, but if my father sees me with you. Just then an older car passed them. The car slowed, then stopped. When the reverse lights went up, Roland shifted in his seat. That's my father's car. Deborah started opening the car door. He can't see me with you. Too late, I think. The older car pulled parallel to Roland's Trans Am. A man cranked down the window. Debbie, what are you doing? You are forbidden to associate with that young man. Pointing to Roland, he curled his lips in a snarl. He was just giving me a ride home. Already, she'd cranked open the door. Get out of the car immediately. Deborah jumped out of the car and slammed the door. She leaned closer to whisper, I gotta go. Sorry. With her books wrapped in her arms, she crossed the street to the older car. Her dad must have said something through the window, but Deborah raised her chin. I'll walk home, thanks. She gave Roland a backwards glance. If only he could help her find $5.
Deb couldn't face her father when she finally got inside the house. How dare he embarrass her like that? Roland must absolutely despise her. Speaking of Roland, she had 3 days, to make that $5. She wouldn't get paid for another 2 weeks, and even being a car hop for 2 weeks wouldn't cover the $5. If only she could make money. Serious money. What did she do well? She could babysit, but her parents never paid her for tending Sue. She handmade a fistful of flyers and went around her neighborhood, crunching through leaves, knocking on doors, and handing neighbors her handwritten advertisement. Everyone nodded and said polite things, but no one needed a sitter. Returning inside, chilled to the bone by the autumn wind, she sat, face in hand, near the stove to warm while her mom made dinner. How would she get that $5? She could do what she always did when she was discouraged or sad. She baked, and it always cheered her up. Mother always kept ingredients on hand and allowed her free use of the kitchen. Deb had started baking in the kitchen when she was 5 with her mom's gold-colored oven, and whenever she felt sorry for herself, her mother always said, "Bake something for someone else." Today, she would make her perfected orange cranberry scones and take them to Marcy. Even if she wouldn't lend her the $5, she'd been a good friend. Deb couldn't help but hope that maybe the scones would soften her up. She mixed butter, flour, and orange zest, then added the whole cranberries. After rolling the dough on the floured countertop, she cut them into triangles and slipped them into the oven, already feeling more optimistic. The sense of the warmed oven made her stomach growl. Once, Mrs. Sugar Queen is the married woman Peeman. Miss Sugar Princess is unmarried. They came out of the oven, she slathered one with butter, just to make sure they tasted okay, and slipped it, still steaming, into her mouth. The fall flavors melted in her mouth. Scents of orange zest filled her nose. Hot cranberries exploded, spilling hot juice onto her tongue. After finishing her scone, she arranged a few pieces on a ceramic plate and placed a cloth napkin over the steaming scones. Maybe after tasting their deliciousness, Marcy would cave and lend her the $5. Throwing her coat around herself, she ducked out the door and walked to Marcy's. She gripped the plate to keep the napkin from flying off in the wind. The sun flashed fading yellow light, popping out from behind dark purple clouds. At Marcy's house, she knocked on the door of her split-level home. Marcy peeked between the frame, frantically waving her in. "It's chilly out. Come in." Once inside, Deb stepped upstairs into the warmth of her living room. She handed the plate to Marcy. "What's this?" She peeked under the cloth napkin. "A bribe?" Deb sat on the velour couch. "You're so funny, I can't give you the money. My mom won't let me." Marcy picked up a triangle and bit into it, sending crumbs onto her dress. "She says it's frivolous." Deb's stomach dropped with the remainder of her hope. "What am I going to do? I can't let Amy Grady win." Marcy finished her bite. "These are so good." She stuffed the rest into her mouth. "Thank you. I bet you could enter these into a contest and win." She took another scone. "The county fair opens tomorrow. They offer $5 to the grand prize winner." "That's a brilliant idea." Could she enter the scones and win the grand prize? Everyone said she took after her grandma's indelible baking skills. For the first time, she had hope. Marcy shook her head, stuffing more into her mouth. "Are you crazy? You'd be competing against the best bakers in the county." Gilly makes the softest, moistest pumpkin roll, and Mr. Porter always wins with his zucchini bread. Undeterred, Deb sat up, thinking, "When can I enter?" "They judge the food portion tomorrow evening. You'd have to enter tomorrow at the latest. You'd have to make something fast. Will you have time to prepare?" Empowered by hope, Deb stood. "I did my preparing for years. I've perfected these scones, and now they will win me the prize money for Roland to be mine." Deb ran home with the plate and napkin, pinched security between her arms and her chest. She would make these scones, and she would win. She had to. Everything depended on it. Although it was dark when she returned home, Deb couldn't wait until tomorrow. Mother had already cleaned the kitchen. Deb started again, getting the bowl out of the cupboard. Mother entered the kitchen, a scowl on her face. "What are you doing in the kitchen this late at night?" "I'm entering my scones in the county fair." Her eyebrows shot upwards. "You're making them tonight?" I have to. I have to enter by tomorrow. She wrapped an apron around her with determination. Deb, the dough has to chill for 2 hours. It'll be midnight before you get to bed. I have to do it. I need the prize money. She measured the flour, sugar, and salt, putting the butter in the freezer so it'll be extra cold. Are you sure you want to spend this time? What if you don't win? Deb shook her head and measured sweet milk dairy milk from the fridge. I can't think about that. She couldn't think about the possibility of failure. Winning was all she could focus on. Every bit of her optimism and hope went into these scones. They had to be the best.
Roland could only go with Deborah to the dance if she satisfied 3 conditions. If she had a dress, if her father didn't know, and if she didn't have to work. Late Monday night, he laid with his head on his hands and stared up to the high ceilings of his room. The dress he didn't know if he could do anything about. What did he know about women's clothing? But the night off. That was a situation he could do something about. What if he talked to Jack Fiddleworth? Would he let her off? As to the father, that was a lost cause. There was no convincing a Poverly of something they didn't want to do. Roland would have to come up with a plan to sneak her out of her home and meet up somewhere else. Tuesday morning dawned. He walked down to the diner and asked to speak to Jack. I want to ask Deborah to the dance, but she said she has to work. I was hoping she could have the night off. Can you schedule her off on that day? Jack rubbed his greasy hands together. Sure, but without those hours, she wouldn't get paid as much. She only gets money for the hours she worked. That's fine. He could reimburse her for the hours missed. His pocket change for the week would more than cover her shorted hours. Feeling satisfied that he'd done right, getting her off work that night, now he needed a dress. He knew just who to ask. His sister. Nicole was a few years younger than he was, about Deborah's age. In fact, if Deborah hadn't skipped a grade, the 2 girls would be in the same class. Once he got home, he knocked on Nicole's bedroom door. Yes, he opened the door. I need some help. She sat on her canopied bed, looking at a fashion magazine. She dropped the magazine. Oh, imagine Roland asking me for help. It's about girl stuff. You still owe me skates. I'll get you another pair, I promise. I need a favor. A dress. A dress? She gave him a sideways glance. A fancy one for homecoming. I didn't realize you were wearing a dress. Will all the men be wearing dresses this year? He elbowed her. Funny, Nicole. It's not for me, it's for Deborah. She doesn't have a dress. Do you have anything that might fit her? She's taller than I am, and I'm 2 sizes smaller. So? So, in the case of dresses, it works best if you fit them. All right, I don't know her size. I can't go to the store and buy her one. You know what? Mama might have one. She had a closet full of clothes that, since her death, had sat there and gathered dust. His father never let him go anywhere near it. He left it untouched all these years. Papa would never let us take one of her dresses. He doesn't have to know. Nicole gave a nervous smile. He'd be so angry if he found out. He won't find out. Let's go, quietly, and don't tell him. They went downstairs to the whole wing dedicated to the master's suite. Roland cracked open the door and sniffed. No cigar smoke. Likely his father wasn't in his room. Tiptoeing across the shag carpet, he crossed the massive room to the walk-in closet. He opened the doors to her side of the closet. Dresses upon dresses, shoes upon shoes, blouses, handbags were all she'd left him 10 years ago when she passed. It was like walking into a hallowed shrine. Jewelry cases lined one wall, all of them from designer labels. A black box held her tiara from her debutante days. He went for the formal dresses in the back. A pink taffeta A-line skirt with tons of fluffy frills would be perfect. It was covered in a zippered plastic protector. Wouldn't you say Deborah and Mother were the same size? I don't know. She'd have to try it on. He bit his lip. Removing the dress was one thing. Hiding it in his closet another, and the worst would be giving it to Deborah. Would she even accept such a gift? How would he get it to her without her dad knowing? What if he said it was used? Would that be better or worse? Such anguish. He snagged the matching heels and took the encased dress into his own closet, heart beating. He hung it, hoping he would have a chance to ask Deborah to come get the dress out of his closet. Tuesday evenings, Deborah always worked at the diner. Perhaps tonight he could tell her about the dress. Now that she had a dress, she'd have to say yes. He'd have to ask her again. Most guys just ask the girls at school during their homeroom class, but Roland wanted to do something special. But what? He had an idea. It could work, but he'd better hurry. The diner opened soon, and he needed to do some prep work. First, he had to stop by the store.
Wednesday morning dawned. Deb raced to the county fairgrounds on the outskirts of town on her bike. Her precious scones were wrapped in a metal lunchbox, so they'd still look good for the presentation. She brought one of her mother's wedding china plates, praying her mother would never find out she'd pinched it, or if she did, that forgiveness would be sweeter since she didn't ask for permission. With sweaty palms and a racing heart, she found the table, filled out the forms. Removing the china from her bike's basket, she placed it on the table and arranged the scones in a pretty pattern around the plate, holding her breath. She scoped out the competition for baked goods. The prize-winning zucchini bread, smelling as scrumptious as ever, competed with the plump, perfectly symmetrical pumpkin rolls. She bit her lip. Maybe the pretty plate would complement the scones. The other entries were sure to win. Other, less likely contenders were a plate of chocolate chip oatmeal cookies that held their shape poorly, apple turnovers made from puff pastry but looked slightly burned, pear and almond cream pastries that smelled delicious, a blueberry ginger mint tart that had spilled over the sides, a variety of pies, and a loaf of white bread that had collapsed in the middle. Just as she was about to leave the table, a plate caught her eye. Thick and fluffy cinnamon rolls, topped with a dollop of thick frosting, crowded a doily-covered plate. Each roll looked identical to the next, the swirl perfectly golden. A new entry from last year. Who would be so bold as to enter cinnamon rolls? Deb looked for a card identifying the baker. Hello. Blind contests hid the competitors' names until after the judging. She would have to wait until Thursday night. She'd made it just in time. Backing away from the table to observe from the corner, she noticed the judges coming down the aisles, inspecting each of the treats, scribbling their observations. Deb knew what they were looking for: size, conformity, uniformity, and presentation. Next, the judges crowded each dish to taste each of the offerings. Every bite was anguish. After each tasting, they wrote notes on the clipboard in their hands. They were giving nothing away in their expressions. They got to the pumpkin roll. One judge raised his eyebrows. Another nodded his head. One whispered, "I remember these from last year." Deb kicked herself. She risked one of her mother's best plates, and she wouldn't even win. Her mother would kill her if anything happened to the plate. They stopped at her plate. Deb held her breath. Each took bite. She couldn't read their expressions. One lady furrowed her brow as she tasted, and kept it there as she wrote. What if she got an unbalanced bite with too much orange zest or too much cranberry? Deb's pulse raced. How could she think she could win? They moved on. At the end, they consulted their notes. Winners wouldn't be announced until Thursday night. She'd have to leave her plate there until the judging was awarded. Then she saw someone else in the room, watching just as nervously as Deb. Amy Grady. What was she doing here? She gnawed on her fingernail, looking, for once, unsure of herself. When Deb caught her gaze, Amy scowled and left in a huff out the side door. Deb glanced down at her wristwatch. In another 15 minutes, she would be late to work. She'd better hurry. She hoped on her bike and made it to the dinner, just on time. Thankfully, she'd been leaving her skates at the diner between shifts since she had the new ones to use at home. When she got there, her boss handed her a bag. "What's this?" She took the bag. Something inside clinked together. The burlap bag was not incredibly heavy, but it definitely held something. Someone dropped it by this morning. The front tag read, "Unscramble the letters to reveal a message for you." A message? You'll have to put that away. We got customers. She would have to deal with the mystery later. She set it on the counter and looked at it every time she came in to get a new order. Who was it from? The note gave no indication of the giver. What was the message about? It was so thrilling and exciting. At the end of her shift, she placed the bag in her bike basket and rode home. Once home, she opened the ribbon, sat on the couch in the living room, and poured out the contents onto their coffee table. When tiles with letters on them spilled everywhere on the wood, she laughed. What was this all about? Inside, it had a sort of guide. Groups of dashes were marked on the page in different numbers: 4, 3, 2, 2, 10, 4, and 2. Then 6 dashes. Someone had taken the time to write out how many words and how many letters in each word. How intriguing! First, she flipped over all the tiles to see all the letters. There were lots of O's. The first word was 4 letters long. She looked through all the letters and tried different combination of words that had 4 letters. This was such a fun puzzle, but would she figure it out? Once she figured out the first word will, then the rest came easily. She pieced tougher the words, and when she placed the last piece, she squealed and jumped up and down. "Will you go to homecoming with me?" Roland. Roland sent her a cute little bag of letters, but she didn't have a dress. Her mother came into the living room to see what the fuss is about. "I need a dress." She quickly scrambled the letters of Roland's name. "I got invited to homecoming dance." "We don't have money for a dress." A line creased in her forehead. She looked so tired in her apron, dish towel over her shoulder. "What can I do? I want to go." Have faith and pray for a miracle. If she said yes to Roland, maybe a dress would appear, like Cinderella. But she didn't have a fairy godmother. She'd say yes first and figure out a dress later. Now how to respond.
Wednesday night, Roland bit back his excitement. Sitting on a couch in the den, he threw a football up into the high ceilings before catching it again. Deborah must have gotten his bag of letter tiles. Would she think it was fun? Would she reply? Would she say yes? Wind blew all around the house. He thought he heard a voice, but he ignored it. Old houses always made funny sounds. Rain tapped lightly on the back windows. The doorbell rang. Deb had to be here responding. He raced to the front door, beating their butler. He shooed Jenkins away and heaved open the heavy door. Amy Grady stood on the doorstep. He frowned. What was she doing here? "Hi, Roland. Aren't you going to invite me in? It's starting to rain." Drops dotted the front porch, then turned into a deluge. "Come in out of the rain." He waved his hand inside. She stood there in her plaid pants and turquoise turtleneck sweater, and flock dripping all over the black and white marble. Shaking the droplets from her hair, she smiled. Roland didn't want to be rude, but he couldn't wait for her to be gone in case Deborah came by. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask you to the homecoming dance." "You want to ask me?" He tired to keep the shock out of his voice. While he believed in women's leb and all, asking a guy to the homecoming dance was a little brazen for his taste, especially since he's not made any kind of advances or hints toward her at all. He didn't even like Amy Grady. "It makes sense, doesn't it?" She cozied up next to him. "We make sense together. You're a football player. I'm a cheerleader." "I've already asked someone else." He kept his voice even. Her smile fell with the rain. "Who? Not that namby-pamby Deb Poverly?" She cackled like a witch. "Yes, I did ask Deborah. Don't you see? Her family's poor. She's nothing. Her family hates your family. You're like oil and water. You two can never be a thing. Dump her and go with me. We'll make homecoming court, and everyone will see how right it is." "I am going with Deborah." He stalked toward the door and opened it to the rush of wet wind. "And now, I think you'd better be going." "You're not going to kick me out into the rain, are you?" He took a peek into the sky. "It looks like it's letting up. You're not made of sugar, are you? You won't melt in the rain." He hoped she'd understand what he implied. Amy Grady rolled her eyes. "Thank you for your concern, Roland, but I'll be fine in the rain." She marched out the door. "And you'll see how wrong she is for you." On the threshold, she turned and faced him, twisted her face into a sneer. "I will be crowned queen, and you will be king, and she'll be dancing by herself on the dance floor during our dance." Roland strained to be civil. "Good night, Amy." He closed the door, then turned and leaned his back against it. What a witch! How could he help her get the message he wasn't interested in her? Amy Grady was a tenacious woman. How would he get rid of her affections? A knock on the door startled him. Amy must be back with some other issue, a flat tire, no doubt. Would that woman ever leave him alone? He turned and thrust open the door. "What?" he asked, annoyed at the person standing in a rain slicker on his doorstep. "Oh." Deborah took a step back. "Sorry." His heart instantly melted. "I thought you were someone else." "I'm here to give you my reply." Ducking her head, she handed him an envelope. "I didn't think you'd be the one answering the door." "How did you get here?" She was absolutely soaked through. I rode my bike over here. Glancing down, she studied her shoes. Riding in the rain? His heart yearned for her. Making a huge sacrifice to bike all the way down here endeared her to him. Would you like to come in? Oh, no. Popping up her head, she colored. Just read the letter in the envelope. It will tell you what you need to do. She ran down the front steps, nearly knocking over a potted mum. Bye-bye now. Can I give you a ride home? He couldn't help but grin. She turned. Oh, heavens, no. My parents would find out. Should he tell her about the dress? He'd better make sure she said yes first. Waiting until she was out of sight, he closed the door, opening the soaked envelope. He pulled out a tri-folded paper. Opening it, he read the words. Thank you for the invitation. If you want to know if the answer is yes or no, I'll give you a clue, but you'll have to work for it. He shook as he read the paper. Surely she wouldn't go through all this trouble to say no, would she? What was the first clue? Open the white pages and search for Ransom Peabody. The fourth digit in his phone number tells you how many letters there are in my answer. Shaking, he walked into the kitchen. Where's the phone book? He asked Martha, their cook. In the drawer by the phone, I think. He pulled it out. Searching in the Sugar Creek directory, he found Ransom Peabody. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ah, the digit was 3. He grinned. It was YES. Next clue. The first letter of my response is the last letter on page 56. He flipped to page 56. Y. The next clue. The second letter of my response is the second to the last letter on page 89. He flipped to 89. E. He grinned. The last clue is the third letter on page 24. He flipped over, but there were no words on page 24. It was an ad for toothpaste. A young girl smiled while holding her toothbrush. Had she messed up? He reread the message. Surely he can stop here and assume the last letter was S, right? He glanced back at the paper. If you went to page 24 and saw the ad for toothpaste, you'll see a girl smiling. That's me. I'm smiling right now. The third letter is really on the next page, first letter. Chuckling to himself, he flipped to page 25. There was the S. Yes, she said yes. Now how would he tell her he had a dress for her without hurting her pride?
The next day, Deb awoke early, smiling to herself. The sun steamed into her windows. The rain from last night refreshed the fall air. A shot of adrenaline went through her. Roland surely read her message by now. She was going to the homecoming dance with the best guy in the whole world. She sat up, smelling breakfast. Baked goods, the county fair. She leaped out of bed and threw on her clothes. In the kitchen, her mom had pancakes going. Deb nabbed a few to munch on while she rode her bike to the county fairgrounds. She made it in record time. She parked her bike and went inside the building. She searched for the ribbons. There on the top was her cranberry orange scones with a grand prize winner on top. She won the $5. Now Friday morning, she could pay the student body president and have Roland be hers for a day. She walked closer to the table. Something didn't look right. Yes, her name was on the cranberry orange scones. The cinnamon rolls to the left won second place, but her mom's wedding china plate was broken, cracked right down the middle. She was devastated. Her mother would kill her. Yes, she won, but at what cost? What happened to my plate? One of the judges placed a hand on her shoulders. We came in here in the morning and placed the ribbons and the name tags. I guess someone came by and broke the plate. It was fine when we came by. Another judge stood close, shaking his head. He handed her an envelope. Who else has been in here? Deb's heart ached. The first judge let out a huff. Girl, everyone has been in here. Deb stuffed her face in her hands and sobbed. Would her mother take her winnings to pay for the irreplaceable plate? She glanced up, wiping her face. Amy Grady stood by the wall with her arms across her chest. Instead of looking defeated, she actually looked smug. That rotten Amy Grady broke her plate. How could she care so much about a baking contest? Of course, she didn't have proof that Amy Grady broke the plate. Just a smirk across her face. The $5 seemed like a hollow victory compared to having to confess to her mother she had used and broke one of her best plates. With a sickened heart, she gathered the pieces and dumped the scones in the trash. She collected her prize money from the people in charge and biked home with the broken plate under her arm. Once she got home, she headed toward the kitchen to find her mom. Tears pricked her eyes. Her mom stirred something in a pot while she read a book. "Mom," her voice wavered, "I did something bad." Her mother looked up, concerned. Then she saw the broken plate. Her expression fell. "Oh no, what happened?" Deb tried to tell her, but sobs choked her throat. She felt like she was 6 again, and she felt so stupid. "I used the plate to showcase my scones in the fair. It's broken." Mom held both pieces in her hands. "How could you?" "It wasn't my fault." Her mother's expression of pain racked Deb's soul. "My grandmother's china. It wasn't her wedding china." Mom's nose turned red, tears dripped down her cheek. "It had gone out of print years ago. I'm so sorry, I know I can't replace it, but I have some money." She opened the envelope. "Here's the $5 I won." She handed her the crisp $5 bill. "You won?" Mom sniffed. "Grand prize." It seemed like little consolation now. If she gave her mother the $5, she wouldn't be able to pay the student council the money she needed to buy Roland tomorrow. "Thank you for at least trying to restore my plate, even though I've told you it's irreplaceable." Her mom snatched the bill from her hand. "I'll take your $5, and you're grounded for a week." Her stomach twisted. "A week." "But homecoming is this weekend. The dance, the game. I promised." "Do you want to be grounded for 2 weeks?" She should have known not to talk back to her mom. Gritting her teeth, hot tears streamed down her face. Not only would she not have the money to buy Roland tomorrow, but she wouldn't get to go with him to the homecoming dance. Amy Grady won. How could she face school?
Friday morning, Roland couldn't wait to see Deborah. Everything was going just as he'd imagined. Perfectly. He would hang around with Deborah today, then tomorrow night they would have the date of their lives. He found Amy Grady, the last person he wanted to see, in the front of the lockers campaigning for her royal appointment. Her mini skirt barely covered the important parts. "Vote for me! Vote for me!" She made a poster and was making people promise to vote for her. Roland rolled his eyes, searching through the crowd of kids for Deborah. She walked in, her head down, her shoulders slumped. He ran to her. "What happened?" "Everything." Her eyes welled with tears. "I lost the $5 I won at the county fair. I am grounded and can't go with you to the dance." He tucked her into his chest where she sobbed. He wanted to protect her from every hurt, from every pain. "Listen, I have a 20 in my wallet right now. You take that to the student body president right now and pay the debt." She raised her head off his chest, her chin trembling. "I can't take it." "Deborah Poverly, stop being so stubborn." He curled the bill into her hand. She pushed it back to him. "You're the stubborn one." "Take it." He wrapped it into her palm again. Shaking her head, she held it out for him. "I'll find a way to pay it on my own." He hid his hands behind his back. "In 3 minutes?" She tried to tuck it into his pockets of his double-knit bell-bottoms, but he stepped away, laughing. "Stand still." "No, you have to take it." "Roland." She held out the $20 bill. The first bell rang. Roland just grinned. "It's yours." Deborah sighed. "It doesn't matter anyway. I'm grounded." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "We can talk about it later. Let's get down to the student council room to pay the money." "But why would you pay for yourself?" She glanced up at him with such pleading eyes. He just grinned back. "I'd rather be with you than Amy Grady, anyway." Once the money was filled, he had permission to be with Deborah all day long. The second bell rang. He walked by her through the empty halls. "I'm yours for all day. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." "Oh, don't say that. I can think of all sorts of things I'd like you to do." She swung her skirt. "Like what?" He arched a brow, filling his head with many desires. "You know what I want, deep down inside?" She stood with her back against the lockers. He propped his hand over her head against the cool metal, feeling his own heat rise with her insinuation. "What?" "For you to clean my room, but Mother would never let you into the house." She ducked under his arm. Her skirt was just the perfect length for her curvy legs. That wasn't exactly what he had in mind. "Ha ha, then no room cleaning. What else?" "I have to make a cake in home ec." "You don't want to make a cake?" "I do. I just don't know what kind of cake. There are so many possibilities." "Most people would say there are just 2, chocolate and vanilla." "Oh no." She stopped and faced him. "There are so many possibilities. The combinations of ingredients are limitless." She waved for him to follow her. "You have such an imagination, Deborah Poverly." He poked her on her nose. When they got to her first period class, home ec, she asked him, "So what's your favorite cake?" She led him over to the ingredient cabinet and got out flour, baking powder, and salt. Me? Oh, once, when we traveled to France, I had a chocolate hazelnut cake. I have always dreamed of eating that again. You can't find hazelnuts here easily, but if you could make that, you would be going beyond my expectations. We can make it together. She lifted a brick of baking chocolate. But can we find hazelnuts? I don't think it's a common ingredient in school kitchens. I can get them. You make the chocolate cake, and we can frost it with the chocolate hazelnut frosting tomorrow. Tomorrow we don't have school. We'll have to sneak in the school to make it. He flashed her a teasing grin. We'll get in trouble. Maybe, but it'll be worth it. In a bowl, she made a double broiler to melt the baking chocolate. Too bad I didn't have the sewing portion of my class today. Then I would command you to make me a dress for homecoming. You won't mind if I show up in something shabby, will you? No, but I'll tell you what. Why don't you command me to get you a dress? I can't say no to you today. Laughing, she mixed butter into the chocolate. I can't do that. Why not? Because where would you get a dress? What if I told you that today I will be your fairy godmother? She studied him with a questioning look in her eye. I wouldn't believe it. First off, you're a boy. Ah, fairy godfather then. That sounded worse. He helped her measure flour from a recipe and sifted it into a bowl. Miracles don't happen unless you believe. But what if I believe and I'm disappointed? I don't think I could handle that. Well, then, shaking his head, he measured sugar and handed her the cup to mix into the melted chocolate. You'll never see the miracle. Okay, I do believe. She flashed him a smile. Lifting a clean wooden spoon from a collection on the counter, she tapped him on the shoulder. I command you to bring me a dress. She laughed. Great, be ready for a surprise. It'll be dropped off at your house tonight. But tonight's the game? It'll be after the game then. Roland couldn't wait. He couldn't be seen by her father, but perhaps he could hide in the bushes again and watch her reaction. He loved making Deborah smile. He wanted for her always to be happy.
Deborah couldn't concentrate on her homework, sitting in the front room. Although she was disappointed not to go to the game, Roland said a surprise would be coming tonight. A half-dozen times she opened the front door, hoping to catch him in the act. Now, it was well past the end of the game and nothing. Maybe she shouldn't have believed. Every time she got her hope up, it was dashed. She heard a knock so slight she almost didn't think she heard it. But she stood with butterflies in her stomach and went to the door. Her parents didn't hear it. Opening the door, she spied a large dress box on the front porch with her name on it. With a giant grin on her face, she stepped out into the dim porch light. She squinted around the bushes to see if she could see anyone, any messenger or delivery person, but no one moved in the landscaping. She bent down, hand over her mouth, to see exactly what Roland provided. Lifting off the lid, she dug through layers of tissue paper. Below the paper was the most beautiful beaded dress with a tulle skirt she'd ever seen. She gasped. Pulling it from its confines, she hugged it to her chest. How did he know her size? It wasn't new. There had been some wear, but not much. In fact, she recognized the dress. His mother wore this dress for the Sugar Queen contest. Tears pricked her eyes. That made it even more special. Gathering up all the packaging, she tucked the dress over her arm. She glanced out into the dark again. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you're still here and watching, thank you." She felt silly when no one responded, but her gratitude was too big to be contained in her heart, and saying the words aloud filled her with joy. Opening the door, she brought it all inside to her room. Sue was already in bed. Where did that come from? My fairy godmother, of course. With a grin, she hung the dress in her closet. Or godfather, she whispered. I thought Mom said you were grounded. Her heart sank. That's right. She wouldn't be allowed outside the house for a week, not even to go to the dance. Maybe she could convince her mother to go, or she'd have to sneak out. Neither one sounded like plausible ideas. However, with the most perfect dress ever, she was sure she would get to the dance. Somehow. She told her mom that she had a project she had to finish at school, so it didn't count as being grounded. The next day, Roland waited for her by the front entrance to the school. I got my wish, She whisked by her. "Oh, you don't have to pretend. It was a dress your mother wore at the Sugar Queen pageant." He grinned. "I don't know what you're talking about. But I'm still grounded. We'll figure a way for you to come, don't worry." He handed her a bag. "What's this?" It weighed in her hands and had an earthy smell. "Hazelnuts. You just have to grind them in a blender and mix it into your chocolate frosting." She opened the bag. Little spherical nuts sat at the bottom. "You're amazing. Where did you get these?" "Montreal. Our family goes often, and we bought them there. I wanted to make the cake, but I didn't know how. And while we finish, we can brainstorm how to get your mom to let you out of your restriction tonight." His bell-bottoms were so large. The bishop sleeves on his shirt would need to be rolled up. The home ec teacher let them in. Being nearly alone in the kitchen was exhilarating. Baking with Roland. Well, the cake was finished. She just needed to make and spread the frosting between the 2 8-inch cakes. "Here." She handed Roland an apron to tie around his shirt. "I don't want you to get chocolate on your nice clothes." He tied the apron behind his back with a smile, and then he rolled up his sleeves. She gathered the ingredients and made the chocolate cocoa buttercream. First, you have to get the butter to room temperature. Then you cream it with the sugar and cocoa powder. We'll add the powdered hazelnuts. This is so fun. Standing shoulder to shoulder, she reveled in his closeness. He rolled up his sleeves on his polyester green and white shirt and started whipping the butter and powdered sugar together, sticking out his tongue in concentration. He was so cute, holding the bowl to his chest, working up a sweat. She heated the hazelnuts to toast them. The whole home ec kitchen smelled of forest. When they were done, she took a towel and took off the papery shell around the nut meat. Then she put them all into a blender. "This is going to be amazing. Just smelling the nuts with the chocolate makes me starving." She turned on the blender, grinding the nut meats, and mixed them into the chocolate frosting. The texture was all wrong. Instead of making it smooth like peanut butter, it looked more like bricklayer's cement. It's not perfect. She held up the spatula and let the gritty frosting run down into the bowl. This was the first time she'd failed at baking something. Her stomach tied in knots. She'd ruined his cake. "It will taste amazing." He dipped a pinky in to taste. Yum, with the small little bits to add crunch. He winked. Shrugging, Deb relaxed a little. "As long as it tastes good, I promise I'll find a good recipe for this. Today, this is good enough." He spread the frosting across the cake. "You'll have to make this for me for my birthday every year." "When's your birthday?" "December 20th. She took the offset spatula and finished smoothing the top and returned it to him. "I totally will. I'll comb the library for recipes. It will be hard to find." He swept the frosting up the cake's sides. "I'll look in all the French cookbooks. Maybe Julia Child has something." He finished the cake. It wasn't beautiful, but it was sure to be tasty. Now she just had to figure out how to let her mom off her restriction for tonight. She cut into the cake. "Here's a piece." He scooped out a piece and held up the fork. "You first." "Are you afraid I've poisoned you?" "Ladies first is how I live my life, especially since you made the cake." "We made it together." She glanced up to him. He tenderly slid the bite into her mouth. Chocolate and toasted hazelnuts exploded in her mouth, filling her tongue with creamy goodness. "You're so right. This cake is amazing. Now I have to have a try." Using the same fork, he sliced off a piece and slid it into his mouth. Just as how I remember it. That can't be. The texture is all wrong." Deb grabbed another forkful. He only smiled. "We have to figure out a way to get you to come tonight. Maybe baking my mom a cake will change her mind." Deb lifted another forkful into her mouth. "You know, that's not a bad idea. Why don't we try bribing your mom?" "With cake? With money? She won't accept your money." "All right, then, what does she want the most?" "That's a good question. I'll ask her." Deb asked Roland for a ride home in his car. She'd send Roland home with the rest of the cake on a plate. It sat next to her on the seat. "Remember, ask your mom what she wants more than anything else." "Right." Deb flashed him a thumbs up. "Here, you still have chocolate on your lips." "I do?" She went to look in the mirror, but Roland held her chin. With a gentle thumb, he traced her lips. "There, I got it." His feathery touch across her lips sent chills down her spine. If only he'd lean forward and kiss her. She blushed. What an unladylike thought. He leaned forward. You'd better get inside. Mom is wondering where you are. With a jolt, Deb shot straight up, heart beating 1,000 miles an hour. She turned. Sue sat outside the window. She had on her roller skates and went up and down the sidewalk. All right, I guess I'd better go. Wish me luck. She held up crossed fingers. Good luck. He crossed his fingers. Hey, I'll call you this afternoon around noon to see how it went. I'll be by the phone so my parents won't pick up first. Perfect. He kissed his hand to her. See you tomorrow. Deb floated away from the car. The sound of Roland driving down the street echoed in her heart. You're in trouble. Sue zoomed past her with the skates. I'm not in trouble. Sue turned and faced her, placing her hands on her hips like Mom did. If that's Roland Laurent, you're in trouble. You're not allowed to hang out with him. Everyone knows that. Well, I'm going to change that. You can't change people's minds. I'm going to try. She walked up the front step and opened the door. Where have you been? At the school. I told you I had to finish a project. Oh, her mom cooled. What's your favorite dessert? Her mom was caught off guard. What's my favorite? Why do you want to know? I finished baking my project and I thought you might like me to make your favorite. Vanilla cake. Nothing special, just plain old vanilla. Can I make one for you? Not tonight. We have company coming over and the kitchen has to be clean. She marched off toward the kitchen. What's your favorite dish to eat? Deb followed her. Her mom stopped and Deb thought she was going to blow a gasket, but instead she turned and with a wistful expression. The most wonderful thing I've ever eaten was on our honeymoon in Boston. Your dad took me to the fanciest restaurant that we really couldn't afford, but I ordered a beef Wellington. It was amazing. Beef Wellington? Deb panicked. That was much harder than a cake. How would she even find the recipe? If you could eat that again, would you be so happy? I'll never have anything like that again. Honeymoons only last so long, and now we're barely making ends meet. But if you could? That would be a dream. Now hurry and go wash up. Our company will be here any minute. Deb had no idea how to make beef Wellington, but it would be her secret to softening up her mother to get her to go to the dance. Any price to pay to be with Roland was enough. Beef Wellington it would have to be. But how was she even going to figure out how to make it?
Roland called to check on Deborah. The phone rang and rang. A sickening feeling opened up in his stomach. What happened to Deborah? Finally, it picked up. He was ready to pretend to be the washing machine repairman, but instead he heard Deborah's voice. Hello? How did it go? I found out what she wants more than anything to eat, beef Wellington. He raised his eyebrows. We have that around here. You do? I've never even heard of it. Well, I can ask my cook how to make it. Perfect. We have to make it tonight so she can let me go. He heard speaking in the background. I've got to go. A warmth spread through his heart. He was one step closer. He just had to figure out what goes into beef Wellington and make it for her mom to soften her up. He walked into the kitchen. The cook, a man who was 4 feet tall and nearly as wide, finished making an inventory of the stocked goods. Pierre, can I ask you a question? Certainly. How do I make beef Wellington? Oh, it's very difficult. It's made with only the best cuts of meat. Do you think you could make it for us tonight? Your father already has the menu planned for this week. I am sorry. Next week, eh? Next week will be too late. He jammed his hands into his pockets. Can you get me the recipe? Sure thing. He went to a book near the cabinets. Pages were folded or torn, with other recipes falling out. Here, you can copy mine. Roland read down the list of ingredients, his stomach falling. This will be more complicated than I thought, Pierre shrugged. Roland pulled out a piece of paper and a pen and copied the instructions and ingredients, shaking his head. Of course, Mrs. Poverly would want something so complicated. He wasn't sure he and Deborah could pull this off, but he was willing to try anything to get Deborah to come with him. Will you tell the housekeeper to add this to the list of shopping items? She's already been shopping for the week. Step 1, shop for ingredients. Step 2, tell Deborah. Step 3, make the complicated dish. Now, he needed her to come over to his house and cook it right now. They only had a few hours until the dance. He called Deborah and told her the bad news. We'd have to start right now. I'll run to the store and buy what we need. I can't leave. Can you make up something? I'll tell them I have a babysitting gig. Her parents bought the excuse, and she biked over to his house. When she showed up, her eyes were large, walking slowly through the foyer. Wow, your house is a mansion! Deborah had never been inside before. The spiral staircase with the open dome skylight above it flooded the black and white marble floor in the entryway with light. He'd never considered it to be anything remarkable. He was used to it. He led her to the kitchen. The ingredients were so expensive. Even he wheezed a bit when he saw the total at the grocery store. They rolled up their sleeves. This time it was his turn to tie an apron around her. This is an amazing kitchen. Far out. Thank you. Here's the directions. Deborah studied them, her brows furrowed. This looks complicated. I've never made anything like this. Me either. I figured since you're a baker and there's a pastry on the outside, it can't be too hard. She grinned, sending his heart to his chest. We can do it. We have to. For the next 4 hours, they worked side by side. Roland's sweaty sweater kept heat in. At last, they were done. Now we just have to take it to my mom. How will we do that? I figure we can put it on a plate, and I can walk it inside? Good. I hope it's still warm. The pastry on the outside will keep in the heat. He drove her to town and dropped her off. Good luck. I hope it works. I'll call, and hopefully I'll report good news. He watched her walk up the street toward her house holding the large platter with the beef Wellington. He inhaled, saying a prayer underneath his breath, and drove off. He'd have to wait and see.
Percent. Deb kicked the door to knock. Sue answered. Where have you been? Mom's mad. She called the Darrells, and they said they hadn't hired you to sit. Deb's stomach dropped. Her mouth went dry. I was cooking dinner for her, a surprise. When she stepped in, she could feel the atmosphere change. Her mother marched over to her, murder in the eyes. Where have you been, young lady? I was over at a friend's house. The Darrells? I called their house an hour ago. They never hired you. I went to Marcy's. We made beef Wellington for you. Deb held up the plate. Why would you lie to me? But I made you your favorite dinner. When will you learn that what I really want most is for my kids to be trustworthy? I don't care about the beef Wellington. She slammed it away from her hands. The platter, already heavy from carrying it from her car, fell to the floor. Deb gasped. She'd spent all afternoon slaving over it. Roland paid for all those ingredients himself. There it was rolling on the floor. I thought you wanted. What I want is for you to be here. Now I'll extend your restrictions, 2 weeks. But tonight is homecoming. I have a date and a dress. Then you shouldn't have lied to me. But I was making you a surprise. Her wounds choked her words. You are not leaving this house. Her mother's words were daggers twisting into her heart. Sue bent and tried to salvage the pastry that had crumbled by the force of the fall. Deb burst into tears and fled to her room. How did this go so wrong? Why was her mother so mean and spiteful? How could she go to the dance? It was all too unfair. The dance was tonight. Didn't her mother even care? When the phone rang at 5, she rushed to get it. It all went wrong. Her eyes ached from crying all evening, her voice froggy. She told him how the food was wasted because her mother thought she was lying. Now I'm grounded for 2 weeks. We'll figure a way to get you to the dance. I just want to go to homecoming. Is that so wrong? How could her parents be so unfair? It'll be fine. I just want to be with you. Deborah? Yes. She sniffed back tears. We'll make it work and we'll be together, I promise. Okay. Besides, you have to find out if you're homecoming queen. Despite her bad day, she could count on Roland to make her laugh. That's totally not going to happen as long as Amy Grady is in the running. We'll be together, I promise. She held on to his promise. A bead of hope sprung up in her heart. Maybe she could find some way to get out of her restriction. Tonight's the dance, he whispered into the phone. I can't wait to see you in the dress. Have you tried it on? Not yet. Try it on. I want to make sure it fits. Deb rolled her eyes. Why bother if she wasn't even going to the dance? It doesn't matter. Put down the phone and try it on. Fine. She set the phone down and peeled back the layers of her clothes that still smelled of the beef Wellington. At her closet, she unhooked the delicate gown from the hanger and stepped into it. She zipped it up and stood in front of her mirror over her dresser. It fits. Scooping up the phone, she clasped the receiver with her other hand. It fits. I can't believe it. How does it look? Deb swayed her hips, allowing the tulle and netting underneath the skirt swish around her thighs. It looks really good. I wish you could see me in it. I will drive over and take a peek and then take you away from there to the dance. My mom and dad would kill you. But dying would be worth it. Glancing in the mirror, Deb blushed to the tips of her ears and was so glad he couldn't see her face now, all beet red. Her heart yearned to see the tiara on top of her head. She had to get to the dance at all cost. Even if she were grounded for the rest of her life, she'd have to make it to the dance. I've got a plan, she whispered into the receiver. Oh? Come pick me up around 9. I know it'll be late and you'll miss the first hour of the dance. No one shows up for that first hour anyway. True, park down the street by our usual drop-off spot and wait for me. I'll be out, all dressed and ready to go. How are you going to manage that? I've got an idea, and I hope it works. She bit her lip until she heard her mother's voice in the hall. I've got to go. See you. She blew him a kiss into the phone and said goodbye, just as her mom opened the door. The grounding also means no telephone. Oh, okay. She hung up the phone in the cradle. What are you wearing? My dress for homecoming. Where did you get it? My date for homecoming got it for me. Her mom's expression changed. Her shoulders relaxed. I wish I could let you go, but your father says I have to stay strong in my follow-through. He's been reading this self-help book about being strong parents. What about raising strong kids? She stepped forward. I could win homecoming queen. Don't you want me to finally be someone important? Her mother paced on the shag carpet. No, I have to be strong. I can't let you go. I'm sorry. If you try to go, I'll ground you for the rest of your high school. She stepped into the hall, lined with walnut paneling. And besides, you probably won't even win. She turned and went down the hall. Deb's stomach twisted. Her mother didn't even think she was capable of winning. Deb collapsed onto her bed, defeated. She had to go to homecoming, no matter what. How could she sneak out of the house?
Roland got ready, slipped on his tux, rubbed some aftershave on his freshly shaven cheeks, picked up the corsage he ordered for Deborah, smelled the scent of the white rose, and tucked it under his arm. Before leaving, he sneaked into his mother's closet and took out a black box, hefting it into his hands. This was his insurance plan. Descending the stairs, he went to the door and out to his car. Driving down the streets in the chilly October air was uncomfortable. He stopped at the spot and waited for 15 minutes. He checked his watch. She said this time, right? She didn't come. He couldn't call her. What was keeping her? He peered out into the darkness. Finally, he got out of the car and leaned against it. He'd just had it washed for the date. Then, moving gently in the shadows, he saw the sparkle from his mother's dress. Then he saw the outline of Deborah's body. Then Deborah came into view. She looked fantastic. Her lips were pale, her hair up in large curls. The pink dress looked amazing on her. He greeted her on the sidewalk. You look fab. Thank you. Her voice held an edge. Let's hurry. I have to be back. My lady. He held the car door open for her. She slid across the leather seats. He drove to the dance. Once they parked, he pulled out the box with the white rose and pinned it to her dress. He'd never wanted to kiss her more. He pulled out the black box. Leaning forward, he wrapped his arm around the back of the bench seat. A knock sounded on the window. Hello. Roland turned, tucking the black box under his seat. In a navy blue dress, Amey Grady waved through the glass. Aren't you coming in? Where have you been? You're so late. Amey Grady broke the spell of desire that had swept him away in the moment. Exhaling, he cracked open the car door, squeezing Deborah's hand. Let me get your door. Hurry, we have to get inside. They're about to announce the results of the voting. Amy's shrill voice pierced the cool night air. Why don't we meet you inside? You don't want to miss it if they announce you won. You'll miss all the applause. Roland tried to tempt her away. She looked Deborah square in the eyes. I don't know why you're always throwing yourself at Roland. She bent her knees and simpered, then skipped off as much as she could in her mini dress and platforms. Roland turned his back to her and rolled his eyes, opening the door for his queen. I am so sorry. She's a terrible person. Deborah stepped out, looking stricken. They're announcing the homecoming court. Don't you think we should get going? I'm not worried about it. But Amey, I'm not concerned about the results. I want you. I don't know how to get it through your head. I love you. You're the one who makes me smile. He held out his elbow for her to take. She smiled and took his elbow. Her warmth strengthened him. He walked with confidence into the gymnasium. The decorations lit up the basketball floor. Crepe paper flowers, streamers. A man on the stage played records piped through large speakers, a top-notch dance. Already the atmosphere was filled with sweat and heat. People had been dancing for a while. The music ended. Students clapped and awaited as the student body president took the microphone from the DJ. He wore a black and white frilly tuxedo. He swept long, sweaty hair off his face. Thank you for all who attended tonight. Thank you to the student council for decorating and providing snacks. From his pocket, he took a piece of paper. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, the results of the homecoming court voting. Cheers again. Roland tugged at his collar. He announced the attendance first. Homecoming princess. The prince. Roland wanted to escape and leave this horrible pressure. The student body president worked the crowd. Now I know you're anxious as I am to hear the name you think should win, and the winner of the homecoming queen for the class of 1972 is Amey Grady. Roland glanced at Deborah, who kept her head down. He prayed he wouldn't win king. And to accompany her is Roland Laurent. His heart sank. What was the big deal about homecoming court anyway?
Deb couldn't say she was heartsick. That might be too strong of a word for the emotion flowing through her cheeks and chest. But all of a sudden, heat overcame her body. Amey Grady was there, with her satin navy blue dress, tugging on Roland. "Come on! We have to go up on stage to crown us!" And then Roland let go of her. She felt the loss of his heat next to her. Though being dragged by Amey, Roland turned and stared at Deb, wild panic in his eyes. "It's okay," she whispered, motioning with her hand, even though she didn't want him to leave her. She couldn't tell which hurt more, the fact that she lost or the fact that Amey Grady was stealing her man right in front of her. The student body president placed a rhinestone crown on each of their heads and said something in the microphone, but Deb couldn't hear or watch. All she felt was the heartbeat and flush clawing at her neck. Now the homecoming queen and king must dance. The band started up again, a slow song. Feeling sick to her stomach at the thought of Roland and Amey Grady dancing, Deb turned. She didn't want to see them dance. It was such a mistake to come tonight. She risked everything to be with Roland, and this is how it turned out. Trying to see through eyes blurred with tears, she maneuvered between dancing couples, trying to find the exit. As she was about to reach the door, ready to inhale the fresh breath of autumn air, she felt a tug on her arm. She turned. Roland stood there with a crown teetering on his head. "Dance with me? But it's for the homecoming court. Not tonight. You're my queen." He swept her up into his arms, dancing his way back into the center of the floor. Roland only had eyes for her. She danced with him, seeing no one else. Until at the end of the dance, she saw Amey Grady with fury in her eyes. Deb looked away. "We should leave. I have something to give you." "Here?" "Out in the car." He didn't have to tell Deb twice. She quit the dance floor in the evil glares of Amey Grady and beelined it to the exit. Roland close on her heels, guiding her through the crowd with his hand on her back, tucking him into her. "Where are you going?" Amey Grady's pitchy voice sounded over the music. "We're leaving." Roland didn't even face her. "But what about our dance?" Amey put her hands on her hips. "Find someone else. You can't do this. It's tradition that the homecoming queen and king dance. Sometimes you gotta break tradition. Not tonight." Deb wanted to punch her but continued to the exit. Her mother might notice she was gone. "What's your hurry?" Amey Grady stopped outside the gym. "Do you have a curfew?" Deb didn't turn. She couldn't let Amey Grady know how much she got under her skin. "I bet your family doesn't even know you're on a date with a Laurent. Everyone in town knows that you can't associate with one another." "Ooh, I'm going to tell." "Shut up," Roland shouted behind him. Deb made it to the doors and opened them to a wash of cool air. She hurried across the parking lot to his car, ready to be free of Amey Grady and the stares of the entire student body. At his car, Roland opened the door. Deb slid in, panting, terrified of Amey Grady telling her mom she was here. Roland opened the door to his side. "I'm so sorry." He removed his crown. Yeah, well, she's a witch anyway. I hope she doesn't tell your parents. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, staring at her. She was probably bluffing. She was just willing to say whatever she thought would get under my skin. She's under my skin. He placed his arm on the back of the seat, stroking her shoulder. Deb laughed, and everything was going to be okay. They could still laugh together, but his touch turned rhythmic, and she hungered for more, sitting alone in the parked car. I have something for you. Retracting his hand, he pulled out a black box from under his seat. What's this? Deb stared, breathless, as he opened the box with shaking hands.
Roland opened the black box. I want you to have this. Inside was the tiara his mother wore, not as the Sugar Queen, but as a debutante in the early 50s. No rhinestones here. These are real diamonds. Deborah gasped, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. I can't take that. It was your mother's. You deserve it. You are my queen. He placed the crown on Deborah's hair. It sparkled in the sparse light of the school's parking lot. It looked regal on her, as if it were made for her. Deborah wiped away tears with the tip of her gloves. Her dewy lips trembled. Just then, he looked up. Over Deborah's shoulder, he could see Amey Grady standing at the front door staring at them. I've wanted to kiss you all night. That dress made me lose my mind. It kept distracting me all night. He leaned forward, scooping her up into his arms. Her warmth seeped through his tuxedo. He brushed back a bit of her hair. She placed a hand over the frills in his tuxedo. She smelled of fresh flowers and vanilla. Inhaling, he leaned into her lips, letting the natural flow of his desire sweep through him and out his kiss. He wanted her to feel how special she was, how much he adored her pluck and talents. If he could express it in words, he would, but for now, he had to let this kiss show all his desire for her. When he broke, he noticed Amey Grady storming off inside the school. He focused on Deborah, and he never wanted to think about Amey Grady again. Promise me we'll always be together. I want this never to end. He leaned his head against the back of his seat, holding her close. Nothing can get between us, even Amey Grady. Who? She laughed. No matter what happens, I promise we'll always be together. I promise too. Roland could live 1,000 deaths to keep that promise.
Deb didn't know how long they kissed, wrapped in each other's arms, but she breathed him in, inhaled him. If she could, she would internalize him and swallow him whole. But instead, she sat there with him until the windows were so foggy she couldn't see out of them. If only the rest of her life would consist of her sitting in Roland's arm, smelling him, hearing his heartbeat. She inspected every little bit of him, from the bit of scruff on his chin to his sideburns. She ran her fingers through his hair, all the while savoring his closeness. If only this would never end. A car drove up. Someone must be very late to the dance. The doors slammed. A person approached and knocked on the window. Deb jumped out of Roland's embrace. Roland unrolled the steamed window to the awaiting silhouette. Her mother, in her house dress, bent to glare into the car. You're in big trouble, young lady. How? Deb's stomach sank, heat rising to her face. Bile roiled in her stomach. I got an anonymous phone call giving me a tip that my daughter had come to the dance. Amey Grady strikes again. Did she have to ruin everything? Get out of the car. Her father, in his large overcoat and jeans, looked equally annoyed, joined her at the window, propping open the car door. He grabbed Deb's upper arm, squeezing it as he hauled her up out of her seat. I'm so sorry. She held Roland's hand, even as her father forced her away. Once outside the car, they slammed the door, dragging her to the Buick. And you'll never see Roland again. You know you're not supposed to even speak to the Laurents. They are the worst family in town. It's bad enough that you sneak out, but seeing him? You are more than grounded. We're taking you out of school. You'll study from home from now on. What? The realization crushed her. She lost her strength. No Roland? No school? She nearly dropped to her knees. Her father propped her up with his grip on her upper arm. Pain tore through her. You have broken our trust too many times. Her mother opened the car door. Can I at least say goodbye to Roland? She looked over her shoulder, trying to catch a glimpse of him through the foggy windows of his car. You are never to speak to him again. Her father jerked her toward him. But I love him, her mother scoffed. You don't know what love is. If he really loved you, he would help you be obedient to your parents. Her father tossed her in the back seat and slammed the door. Deb peered out the windows, face pressed against the cool glass. This is so unfair. Roland's taillights flashed red. His headlamps lit up the car in front of him. Then he shot out of the school parking lot with a roar of his engine. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, dropping onto her satin dress. She didn't care. Once at home, she ran to her room, throwing herself onto her bed, sobbing. She'd kept the tears mostly inside until she could be nearly alone. Sue sat up and rubbed her eyes. What happened? I went to homecoming with Roland. No wonder Dad and Mom lost a gasket. Bringing her knees to her chest, Sue moved in the dark. Your dress looks pretty. Where did you get the tiara? Her mom didn't even ask about the tiara. Roland gave it to me. Hot tears spilled over her cheeks, landing on her pillow. He must really like you. Maybe, but Mom and Pop won't let us be together. They've forbidden me to see him again. I can't even go to school. All I did was go to the dance with him. You're very brave. Or stupid. She sniffed up her nose. Where was her handkerchief? What you did was brave. You disobeyed, which is not good, but Mom and Dad were wrong to forbid you not to see Roland. Sue sat up in bed. When I'm older, this silly feud will die with my family. I won't tell my kids they have to hate a certain family just because of something that happened long ago, and nobody can even remember what it is. I'm with you. It's stupid. Sydney better not teach his kids that, too. Slipping down into her bed, Sue pulled the covers up around her chest. He won't. He's too sensible to perpetuate stupid things. Sitting up, Deb dried her eyes with a piece of shirt that was on her bed, laughing. I love you, Sue. I love you, too. It takes guts to stand up for something. I wish Mom and Dad could see how wonderful Roland is. You'll never change their minds, Sue tisked. Are you going to keep the tiara? Of course. Deb touched it delicately with her gloved hand. Can I try it on? Sue flipped back her covers and stood close to her older sister. Sure. Removing the tiara pained Deb. Roland placed it there, but Sue had cheered her up. She placed it on her little sister's head. There, you're beautiful. It's amazing how regal I feel with a tiara. Pinching her nightdress, Sue spun in the space between their beds. Everyone should wear one. Sue's eyes brightened even in the darkness. No kidding, you could start a club. I'd join it. Deb laughed. Wouldn't that be fun? Sue handed her back her tiara. Things will work out in the end. If it's not right, it's not the end. You're right. In the dark, Deb placed the tiara on her nightstand and unzipped her dress, allowing the heat and weight of it to fall to her feet. What could she do about Roland? What if after tonight's debacle, he never wanted to see her again? The expression of disgust on her mother's face could only be compared to her outrage. And her father. He'd been taught for generations the Laurents were no good. She wouldn't change their minds. But she could do something about her situation. The next few months dragged by as Deb took all her classwork home. She checked in with her teachers under her mother's supervision, but then had to complete all the homework without instruction. Thankfully, schoolwork was never a bother for Deb. She'd always gotten good grades and was generally a good student. It was the rumors that bothered her. Walking into class with her macrame belt swinging at her side and her books in her hand, she could hear whispers, students talking about her behind her back. Her parents won't let her back in school. I thought she was pregnant. Does she look pregnant to you? They had a huge fight in the parking lot. I heard it. Laurents and Poverlys don't mix. Everyone knows that. Deb held her head high through all the gossip. But what pained her the most was that Roland never contacted her. Not once. She bore all of this alone in silence. One day, before Christmas break, in the school office, she caught sight of Roland. Even with her mother by her side, Deb tried to get his attention, but he just turned from her, talking to another one of his footballer friends. Deb nearly collapsed onto the wooden chairs in the office with so much pain. He ignored her. All this suffering for nothing. After collecting her assignments, she went through the door of the office and one of the footballers ran into them, knocking Deb off balance. Pardon me. Her mother marched through the door in indignation. All of Deb's books fell to the ground. With a heated face, she bent to pick them up. The boy helped, piling books into Deb's arms. After he left, she noticed a paper sticking from her notebook. Her heart thundered. Was it a note? She waited until she was out in the car. While her mother droned on about personal responsibility and hard work, Deb lifted the edge of the notebook. There inside sat a note. With shaking hands, she pulled it toward the edge so she could read it in better light. It was from Roland. He asked to meet her at the drugstore in town at 11 a.m. on Saturday. Her heart thundered. Her mom droned on, but Deb slid the paper out and crumpled it into a tight ball and stuck it in her pocket. She must never let her parents see it, and she'd have Sue ask her to go to the drugstore Saturday.
Deborah got her note. When Roland saw her and her sister walk into the drugstore at 11 Saturday morning with a ding of the door, his heart nearly flew from his chest. He hadn't seen her since the night of homecoming. She and her sister were bundled in coats, their cheeks and noses red from the walk. Snow covered the grass, obscuring even the parking curbs. He made eye contact with Deb over the soap flakes. Unwrapping her scarf, Deborah walked toward the back where he stood, looking at medicine and cough syrup near the tissues. Thankfully, Sue found the candy aisle closer to the door and stayed there. Christmas music played softly over the speakers. "It's so good to see you." His voice caught with emotion. The injustice of this rankled his nerves. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I've missed you so much." He caught her in a hug, holding her and smelling her vanilla scent. "What would you think about marriage?" She pulled back and faced him, eyes wide in shock. "Are you crazy? My parents won't let me talk to you, much less marry you." He clasped her hands, ducking behind the wall of toilet paper. "I have to be with you. You are my only reason to live. Kissing you was like flying to the moon. Marriage, though, it's forbidden, by my parents as well as yours." He pulled her deeper in the recesses of the drugstore, away from the ears of patrons. "By summer, we'll both be 18. Thanks to the president and the stupid war, we've been granted our majority. Our parents won't have a say. We can elope." "Elope?" Her voice was breathless. "Where would we go?" "Canada. My father has a house there. I could get a job since I'm a dual citizen. If we leave together, everyone will know. My parents would hunt me down, stop me, and bring me back here." "All right. I don't know if I'll ever get to speak to you again, but I've thought this all through. I'll leave town first. We'll meet up at this house. Here's the address." He handed her a piece of paper. "Don't lose it. Once you cross into Canada, you can buy a map. It's not hard to find the house." "This is too risky." Deborah glanced at her sister, still looking at Candy. "What if one of us changes our mind?" "We won't. But what if?" He held her again, stroking her hair. "Nothing can break us apart. We are destined to be together." "But to wait until June? We can't do anything until after graduation." "That's 6 months away. But after that, we can be together every day." Just saying the words sounded glorious to him. "Will you promise to come?" She grasped him closer, crying into his chest. "I promise. I will move heaven and earth to be there." He leaned in and kissed her tears away, landing at last on her sweet mouth. Breaking away, he held her again. "Then I will hold you to that promise. I will wait for you until you come." With a spark of hope, he let her go.
6 months later, Deb heard rumors of Roland leaving town to find work up north after high school graduation. Deb celebrated her 18th birthday the first week of June with a smile in her heart, yet with a sorrowful realization that this would be her last birthday at home. She opened presents she planned to leave behind. She'd already packed a suitcase and left it under her bed. She had tickets on a bus to get her to the border. Then after that, she'd hitchhike to the nearest city and find someone who could take her to Roland. After eating cake aplenty, she sat on her bed, unrolling the paper with his address. This was her ticket to freedom, her ticket to happiness. Only Sue knew her plan. The bus left that night. She walked into the kitchen to say goodbye to her mother. Out the windows, she saw the wind gathering speed. The radio predicted a bad storm. But how many times had the weather people been flat out wrong? Deb would risk anything to get to Roland. Her mother stood by the stove. That was how she always wanted to remember her, cooking in her apron over the old stove. "I love you, Mom." Her mom raised an eyebrow. "So you finally made peace with me about Roland?" "I have found peace, yes. I knew with high school graduation would come an understanding. Now you can forget all about him and start your life. You're 18 now. You can put childish things away. You can start looking for a more suitable marriage partner." Deb was nearly repulsed by her mother, but with the hope springing in her chest, she could forgive her. She waited until everyone in the house went to sleep early, as they always did. The wind howled something awful around their old clapboard house. Deb was a little frightened to walk with her suitcase to the bus depot. After she was sure everyone was asleep, she crept out the front door, the weight of her suitcase in her hand. Winds nearly blew her sideways. She'd never seen winds like that. Branches fell off trees, power lines fell in the road, but she kept walking. Finally, she spotted the light of the bus depot. "What are you doing here?" a man asked. "I have a ticket to the border." "You're not going anywhere tonight, haven't you heard? Hurricane Agnes is coming up the coast." "But surely it won't be that bad. It's kicking up winds like I don't think the bus will be going anywhere tonight." "I need to get to Canada. You'll have to wait. This storm is supposed to be a doozy. Can I find someone who can give me a ride? You can try taking a cab, but I doubt anyone will be foolhardy enough to take you in this wind and rain." Leaving her suitcase at the bus depot because she couldn't lug it farther, she hurried downtown in the torrential rain until she was soaked through. She spotted a yellow cab at the curb of a vacant street washed with water. Deb ducked her head until she could see inside his window. He cracked the window. "What are you doing out in this storm? Please, I'll pay you whatever you want to take me to the Canadian border. Cash?" Hair hung from a scraggly baseball cap. "Whatever I don't have, I'll charge." She held up her mother's card she'd pinched. $1,000? It's a deal. Deb opened the back door and slid along the dark brown vinyl seats. "I wasn't expecting you to agree." Turning in his seat, the man raised his eyebrows. "You offered and I accepted. Let's go." Deb's heart sounded louder than the storm outside. They inched through the water in the cab, windshield wipers running overtime. "I've never seen so much water on these roads. Heck, I can barely even see the roads." Branches with leaves on them flew across the street. $1,000. $1,000, the driver kept saying through gritted teeth. He held the steering wheel with both hands, with a hunched back, all his muscled tense. The tree tunnels around them shook with wind and rain. Angry leaves reached out and seemed to try to pull them back. Deb sat forward, her eyes glued to the river of the road in front of her. "Nothing can keep us apart. We're destined to be together." She'd make it to him. She just knew it. A loud crack sounded in front of them. Deb wasn't sure if it was thunder or her heart splitting in two. A tree fell in front of them on the road, shaking the ground beneath them. The driver came to a halt, lifting his hands from the wheel in defeat. "It's no use. We can't go on. We have to turn around. You can't go on foot, and this tree will take several men and days to clear." The driver wiped his hand down his face. "I don't have days." Deb pounded her fist against the vinyl seat. "You have terrible timing." He sat back, shaking his head. "Whatever you were in a rush to see, you'll have to put it off. You're not going anywhere tonight." "Is there another road?" A dull ache began at the base of her neck, throbbing until it overtook her whole head. "To Canada? As far as you're concerned, this is it, and we're done here. We'll have to wait out the storm." Deb and the driver found a farmhouse. The owners invited them in to ride out the storm with them. But she couldn't go back to Sugar Creek, not without Roland. All the light and joy evaporated from her life. Did anyone know of her mad dash to get out of town? "You don't mind if I call my mom, do you?" "Are you kidding me?" The farmer who owned the sprawling Victorian farmhouse looked 100 years old. "The phone lines are down. It will take weeks before anyone is calling anywhere." Deb fell into the couch and slept until the cab driver woke her and said the roads were clear. "To get to Canada?" He shook his head. "To get back to Sugar Creek. The roads out of here won't be cleared for days. These parts aren't their highest priorities." "I owe you some money." She fumbled with her wallet. "Pay me when we get back." "I'm not going back. You can't stay here." She glanced at the older couple at the wooden table. She closed her eyes. She didn't have anything left. Her clothes and necessities were left in her suitcase at the bus depot. She couldn't go forward, but the thought of returning home pained her. "I don't know what else to do. Go home. Whatever you were running away from will be all right." "I wasn't running away. I was running towards something, but she didn't say that." "Come, let's get you into dry clothes at home." Defeated, Deb stood, still damp, thanked the nice couple, and left with the cab driver. The roads back were a mess now that the rain had cleared. Water created huge potholes and in some places swept the road away. They were lucky to get as far as they did. Once back in Sugar Creek, several signs had been knocked down. Debris littered downtown. He dropped her off at the bus depot. Her suitcase was long gone. Swept away by water? Taken by someone? Who knows? She walked home. Her mother opened the door with creases in her forehead that melted when she saw Deb. "Oh, thank goodness you're here." Deb stepped in her old familiar house. Everything smelled the same. But she'd changed. She didn't have hope anymore. That storm was a doozy. Knocked out the whole eastern seaboard. No phone lines, no trains running. It dumped several feet of rain. Flooded several places here in Sugar Creek. It'll be a while before we know the rest of the damage. Deb blinked back tears on the couch. She and Roland must not have been meant to be. If they were meant to be, they would be together. Surely he could call. He had her number. He could write. He knew her address. He would wonder what happened. Did he know how bad the storm was? Did he see the news from Vermont in Canada? How long would he wait before he gave up? It will take weeks to rebuild those roads, all washed out. Incredible. Once in a lifetime. Deb stood from the couch, wordlessly went into her room and closed the door. She took out the tiara and held it to her chest. It was the only thing she had left from Roland. Maybe he would call. Maybe he would return. Maybe. In the weeks following, she never got a chance to try again. Once the mail started running again, she wrote letters and waited by the mailbox for weeks, but received no answer. By September, she had given up. He didn't return. He didn't contact her. And she would never love anyone as much as she loved Roland.
Read A White Christmas Lie, where Roland and Deborah are reunited after 50 years, available at all major book retailers and at books.ameyzeigler.com. This has been a Lazy Glaze Communications production.